The wind on the high plains did not just blow, it hunted. It scoured the earth with a jealous, hollow scream, stripping the warmth from the stone and the moisture from the soil. The sky above the territory was the color of a bruised iron skillet, heavy and low, pressing down on the flat miles of short grass that stretched toward a horizon that never seemed to get any closer. The air smelled of metallic dust and the sharp, coppery bite of snow that was waiting just behind the cloud bank, ready to bury the world. Eli Turner rode through this gray emptiness with his chin tucked into the collar of his sheepskin coat. He was a man whittled down by miles. His hat was pulled low, the brim battered and stained with the sweat of 3 different territories. And his eyes were the color of old flint, hard and unreadable. He was nearing 30, though the lines around his mouth suggested he had lived those years twice over. He carried nothing but a bedroll that had grown thin, a saddlebag with a lump of hardtack and dried beef, and a silence that was heavier than both. He moved from job to job like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. Staying in one place meant knowing people, and knowing people meant remembering. And remembering was a luxury Eli could not afford. He had left a life behind in Kansas, buried under 6 feet of black dirt, and he had not stopped moving since. The blue norther hit with the violence of a hammer strike. One moment the air was merely cold. The next, it was a blinding white sheet of ice crystals driven by a gale that could strip the hide off a steer. The temperature plummeted, dropping 20 degrees in the span of 10 minutes. Eli felt the cold seep through his coat, searching for the heat of his blood. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had seen better days, pinned its ears back and shuddered. The ground was treacherous, a deceptive mix of frozen mud and loose shale. They were crossing a dry wash, the bank steep and crumbled. When the wind gusted hard enough to shove the horse sideways, the animal's hoof caught in a hidden badger hole masked by a tumbleweed. The horse went down with a terrified squeal. Eli kicked his feet free of the stirrups, a reflex born of a decade in the saddle, but the ground came up too fast. His shoulders slammed into the frozen earth, and his head cracked against a jagged protruding rock. The world went white, then black, then swam back into a nauseating gray focus. Eli lay in the wash, the wind howling over the lip of the bank like a funeral choir. He tasted blood, hot and metallic, running down the side of his face into his eye. He tried to push himself up, but the horizon tilted dangerously. His horse was scrambling up a few yards away, favoring its left foreleg but standing. The animal looked at him, eyes wide and rimmed with white, shivering violently. Eli forced himself to stand. His knees felt like water. The cold was already chewing at his fingers, making them stiff and clumsy as he reached for the reins. He could not stay here. To stop moving in a blue norther was to die. He began to walk, leading the limping horse, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. He did not know how long he walked. Time lost its shape in the whiteout. The cold became a narcotic, urging him to lie down, to close his eyes, to sleep. Just as the darkness began to bleed out the last gray light of the afternoon, he saw it, a thin, desperate thread of gray smoke rising against the wind, darker than the snow. He stumbled toward it, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. The shape of a homestead emerged from the gloom, perched precariously on a rise of land that took the full brunt of the gale. It was a rough, ugly place, the barn leaning slightly to the west, the corrals patched with driftwood and wire. In the yard, a figure was working. A woman stood before a massive chopping block, an axe in her hands. She was splitting wood with a rhythm that was terrifying in its efficiency. She brought the axe down, the steel biting through heartwood with a sharp crack, and split the log clean. She was not a small woman. Even through his concussed haze, Eli could see the sheer scale of her. She was tall, broad in the shoulders, with a back as straight and unyielding as a fence post. She wore a man's heavy coat that strained at the shoulders and a battered hat pulled low. She was splitting wood like she was trying to split the world in two, driving the blade down with a fury that seemed to keep the cold at bay. Eli let go of the reins and took a step forward. His boots scuffed loudly on a rock. The woman spun around, the axe coming up in a smooth, defensive arc. She did not look frightened. She looked dangerous. "Who is there?" she shouted, her voice rough, shaped by the wind. Eli tried to raise a hand to show he was empty, but his arm felt like lead. He swayed. "I need," he rasped, but the wind stole the words. The woman stepped closer. The axe held across her chest like a shield. She had a face carved from the same hard land as the hills, sharp cheekbones, a mouth set in a grim line, and eyes that were dark and guarded. She looked at him not with pity, but with the calculation of someone assessing a threat. Eli took one more step, and the ground vanished. He pitched forward, the snow rushing up to meet him. He felt rough hands grab him before he hit the earth completely. They were strong hands, surprisingly large, gripping his coat with a strength that shocked him. She did not coo or cry out. She grunted with effort, hauling him up, her shoulder digging into his side. She smelled of pine pitch and wood smoke and cold wool. "Come on, then," she muttered, the words tight. "You are heavy as a dead steer." She dragged him. It was not an act of kindness. It was the grim necessity of the plains, where leaving a man to freeze was a sin that would curdle your luck for a year. She kicked the door of the cabin open and hauled him over the threshold, dropping him onto the floorboards near the stove. The heat hit him like a physical blow, thawing his frozen skin so fast it burned. Eli groaned, rolling onto his back. He blinked up at the ceiling, watching the firelight dance on the rough-hewn beams. The woman bolted the door against the wind. She turned and looked down at him, her chest heaving slightly from the exertion. She stripped off her heavy coat and hung it on a peg underneath. She wore a simple work dress made of gray wool, patched at the elbows, but it did nothing to hide the power of her frame. She was 6 feet if she was an inch, her arms thick with muscle that rippled as she rolled up her sleeves. She knelt beside him, her face twisting in distaste as she saw the blood matting his hair. "Sit up," she ordered. Eli struggled to obey, propping himself against the leg of a heavy oak table. The room spun. The cabin was sparse. There were no rugs, no curtains, no softened edges. It was a room built for survival, not comfort. The floor was swept clean enough to eat off. A cast-iron stove dominated the center, radiating a fierce heat. On a high shelf, alone and gathering no dust, lay a photograph frame turned face down. The woman returned with a basin of hot water and a clean rag. She moved with a heavy, deliberate grace. She washed the blood from his face, the water turning pink in the basin. The cloth was rough, but her touch was efficient. "Hold still," she said. "This will sting." She poured something that smelled like corn whiskey over the gash on his head. Eli hissed through his teeth, his hands gripping the legs of the table until his knuckles turned white. "Need to stitch it," she said. "It is deep." "Do what you have to," Eli managed to say, his voice sounding like gravel rattling in a tin can. She produced a needle and thread that she had passed through the flame of a lantern. As she leaned in, Eli could see the fine lines of fatigue etched around her eyes. She smelled of soap and hard work. She began to stitch. Her hands were large, the knuckles slightly swollen from labor, but they were steady. She pulled the skin together and drove the needle through. Eli flinched. At the small movement, the woman jerked back as if he had struck her. Her eyes went wide for a fraction of a second, a flash of pure animal panic, before the shutter came down again. "Sorry," Eli whispered. She did not answer. She resumed her work, but Eli felt a faint tremor in her fingers now. Every time the rough pad of her thumb brushed his forehead, the tremor was there. It was a vibration of nerves, a hum of tension that contradicted the stony expression on her face. He watched her as she worked. She was constantly aware of him, tracking his breathing, her body coiled tight. Outside, the wind rattled the door on its hinges, and she flinched again, her eyes darting to the heavy iron bolt. When Eli shifted his boot on the floorboards, the sound was loud in the small room, and her shoulders hiked up toward her ears. She acted like a creature that had been hunted. She tied off the last stitch and bit the thread with her teeth. "Done," she said, standing up abruptly and moving away from him. She dumped the bloody water into a slop bucket. "Thank you, ma'am," Eli said. "I would have died out there." She did not look at him. She was wiping her hands on a rag, scrubbing at the skin as if the blood were something poisonous. "Rest," she said, her voice flat. "There is a blanket in the corner. You sleep there. Do not come near the bed. I can pay you for the trouble," Eli said, reaching for his pocket. She turned on him then, her eyes flashing. "I do not want your money tonight. I want you to sleep, and in the morning, when the storm breaks, you leave. You take your horse and you go." Eli looked at her, seeing the wall she had built around herself. It was higher and thicker than the walls of the cabin. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. He crawled to the corner where a buffalo hide and a wool blanket lay. He wrapped himself up, the heat of the stove fighting the chill in his bones. He watched her for a long time. She sat at the table with her back to him, staring at the dark window. She did not move. She sat like a sentry keeping watch over an empty fort. Eli fell into a sleep that was black and dreamless. Morning broke with a silence that was deafening after the roar of the storm. The sun came up pale and watery, illuminating a world encased in ice. Eli woke with a headache that throbbed in time with his heartbeat. He sat up, groaning. The cabin was empty, but the stove was still warm, and a pot of coffee sat on the iron plate. He poured himself a cup, his hands shaking slightly, and drank the bitter, black liquid. It scalded his throat and woke him up. He found his hat and stepped outside. The brilliance of the sun on the snow made him squint. He looked out over the homestead. In the harsh light of day, the desperation of the place was laid bare. The barn roof was sagging dangerously on the north side, half the shingles stripped away by the wind. The fences were a disaster, posts leaning at drunken angles, wire rusted and snapped. A small herd of perhaps 30 head of cattle huddled in the lee of a windbreak, their breath steaming in the frigid air. And there, just beyond the garden patch where dead cornstalks rattled in the breeze, was a fresh grave. The earth was mounded up, raw and ugly against the white snow. There was a wooden cross at the head, but no name had been carved into it. Just the wood, gray and silent. Eli walked toward the barn. He found the woman there. She was struggling with a heavy hay bale, trying to hoist it up into the loft. It was a two-man job, and she was doing it alone. Her face was red with exertion, her teeth gritted. "Let me get that," Eli said. She spun around, startled. She dropped the bale, and it hit the ground with a thud. "I told you to leave," she said, her breath coming in clouds. Eli ignored her. He stepped forward, grabbed the bale with his good shoulder, and with a grunt of effort, swung it up onto the loft edge. He turned to face her. "My horse is lame," he said. "He needs a few days, and I've got nowhere to be in a hurry. I cannot feed a hand," she said sharply. "I have barely got enough for the winter as it is. I do not want wages," Eli said. He looked around the yard, gesturing at the leaning posts and the sagging roof. "I will work for my keep. I can fix that roof before the next snow brings it down. I can tighten this wire. And I saw a gelding in the corral that looks like he has never had a saddle on him. I can break him for you. A broken horse is worth 3 times what a wild one is." May Kincaid looked at him. She crossed her arms over her chest. She was tall enough that she looked him straight in the eye. The wind whipped a loose strand of dark hair across her face, and she brushed it away impatiently. "Why?" she asked. Eli looked at his boots, then back at her. "Because I hate owing a debt. You stitched my head. Let me fix your roof." May looked at the barn. She looked at the heavy fence posts that she had been struggling to reset for weeks. She looked at her own hands, chapped and bleeding from the cold. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that settled in the marrow and made your bones feel like lead. Winter was coming. If that roof failed, the hay would rot. If the hay rotted, the cows died. If the cows died, she starved. Pride was a warm coat, but it was not something you could eat. 3 days, she said, her voice hard. You fix the roof, you mend the north fence line. Then you go, deal, Eli said. I need supplies from town, she said, turning away to hide the slump in her shoulders. Flour, coffee, nails for the roof. I have a list written out. Take the wagon. My gray mare can pull it. The town of Bitter Creek was a collection of clapboard buildings clustered around a muddy thoroughfare that froze into ruts in the winter and turned to soup in the spring. Eli parked the wagon in front of the mercantile. He felt the eyes on him immediately. A stranger was always news, but a stranger driving May Kincaid's wagon was a headline. He walked into the store, the bell above the door jingling cheerfully. The warmth inside smelled of dried apples, leather, and tobacco. 2 men were playing checkers by the stove, and a group of women were inspecting a bolt of calico at the counter. The conversation stopped the moment Eli walked in. He approached the counter, pulling the folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I need these filled," he said to the clerk, a balding man with spectacles and a weak chin. The clerk took the list. He glanced at the handwriting, sharp, angular letters, and his eyebrows went up. "You working for the widow Kincaid?" the clerk asked. His voice was loud enough to carry to the back of the room. Eli didn't blink. "Just helping out for a few days." One of the men by the stove chuckled. It was a dry, nasty sound. "Brave man," he said. "Or a foolish one. They say that woman is too big for a normal man to handle, like trying to saddle a grizzly bear." The women at the counter giggled behind their hands, turning their backs to Eli, but he could feel them listening. "She is strange," one of the women whispered. "Loud enough to be heard, unnatural. That is what she is. I heard she killed him," the second man by the stove said, moving a checker piece with a snap. "Her husband, Frank, I heard she crushed him, just squeezed the life right out of him." "Hush now," the clerk said, though he was smirking. "Ain't no proof of that, just that he ended up dead and she ended up alone. Some say she cursed him." Eli felt a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the stove. He looked at the clerk. "Just the supplies," he said quietly. The clerk bustled away, filling a sack with flour, wrapping a parcel of coffee beans, counting out nails into a paper bag. The whispers continued behind Eli's back. "Did you see the size of her hands? A woman like that. It ain't right. God's punishment, leaving her barren and alone." Eli stood still. He was a man who had seen enough violence to know that words were just wind unless you gave them weight. But these words were not wind. They were stones, thrown by people who stood safe behind glass windows at a woman who was out there trying to keep a roof over her head. He wanted to turn around. He wanted to tell them that she had saved his life. He wanted to tell them about the clean floor and the steady hands. But he knew it wouldn't matter. People loved a monster because it made them feel like saints. Defending her would only make the rumors worse, that she had bewitched him, or bought him. The clerk placed the items on the counter. "That will be $4.50. Eli placed the coins on the counter. He did not look at the men by the stove. He did not look at the women. He picked up the heavy sacks, one in each hand. He turned to the door. As he passed the checker players, he stopped. The silence in the room stretched tight. Eli looked at the man who had laughed. He held the man's gaze until the fellow looked away, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Eli pushed the door open and walked out into the cold. He loaded the wagon. His jaw set so tight his teeth ached. He carried the ugliness of the town back with him, a heaviness that sat on the seat beside him all the way back to the homestead. May was waiting for him by the barn when he pulled in. The sun was going down, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. She stood with her arms crossed, watching him as he climbed down from the wagon seat. She was waiting for it. Eli could see it in her stance. She was waiting for the smirk. She was waiting for him to ask the question the men in town had hinted at. She was waiting for the price men always demanded for their help: humiliation. Eli lifted the sack of flour onto his shoulder. He walked past her toward the cabin. "Store was out of dried peaches," he said, "but I got the rest. And I got an extra pound of nails. The roof looks worse than I thought." May blinked. She watched him walk into the house. She stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at her dress. The cruelty she had braced herself for had not come. She followed him inside. They ate a supper of beans and cornbread in silence. The wind had picked up again, rattling the shutters. After the plates were cleared, May turned to him. She stood by the stove, the firelight casting long shadows across her face. "Rules," she said. Eli looked up from where he was mending a tear in his coat. "All right. You sleep in the barn loft starting tonight. It is warm enough with the hay. I will give you extra blankets." "Fair enough," Eli said. "No questions." She continued. "You do not ask about the grave. You do not ask about my husband. You do not ask about me. You do the work, you eat, and when the weather breaks for good, you leave." Eli nodded slowly. "I can abide by that." May nodded, satisfied. She reached behind the door and pulled down a Winchester rifle. She checked the lever action, her hands moving with a practiced familiarity. "Coyotes," she said, answering his unasked question. "They come close on nights like this." After the calves, her hands were steady on the gun, but when she looked up, Eli saw something in her eyes that stopped him. They were dark, beautiful eyes, but they were hollow. They were the eyes of a woman who had seen the end of the world and was still waiting for the dust to settle. They were too empty for a woman her age. She went out to check the herd. Eli took his blankets and went to the barn. He slept fitfully. The smell of the horses and the dry hay was comforting, but his mind wouldn't settle. Sometime after midnight, he woke up. The silence of the ranch was heavy. He climbed down the ladder and walked to the house. He didn't know why, maybe just to check the fire. He pushed the door open quietly. May was sitting at the table. She was not sleeping. The rifle lay across her lap. A single lantern burned low on the table, casting a small circle of golden light. She was staring into the darkness of the room, listening. She was listening like the dark owed her money and she was waiting to collect. She didn't jump when he entered. She just turned her head slowly. Eli stopped in the doorway. "I couldn't sleep," he said. May looked at him. There was no anger in her face now, just a profound weariness. "There is coffee left," she said softly. "It is cold, though I don't mind." Eli walked to the table. He poured a cup of the black, thick liquid and sat down opposite her. He did not speak. He did not ask her what she was afraid of. He just sat there, sipping the cold coffee, his presence a solid thing in the room. The wind howled outside, scratching at the walls, but inside the circle of lantern light, it was quiet. A strange, fragile peace settled over the table. It was the smallest warmth in a place built for cold. Eli watched her over the rim of his cup. She was looking down at her hands, tracing the grain of the wood on the table with a finger. She lifted her own cup to her lips. As she drank, the light caught the curve of her mouth. Her lips were full, soft in a face that was all hard angles. For a second, Eli forgot the cold. He forgot the town. He forgot the grave out back. His gaze caught on her mouth, on the way her throat moved as she swallowed. It was a hunger he hadn't felt in years, a sudden, sharp pull that startled him. May lowered the cup. She saw him looking. Her eyes met his. She saw the spark there, the sudden heat. She stiffened. The wall slammed back up. She turned her face away sharply, her jaw clenching. She was angry, not at him, but at the sudden, traitorous lurch in her own chest. She was angry that for 1 second, she had wanted to be looked at. "Go to the barn. Eli," she said, her voice brittle. Eli stood up. He left the cup on the table. "Good night. May," he said. He walked out into the cold night, the image of her mouth burning in his mind like a brand. The days that followed the storm were defined by the rhythm of iron against wood. The wind did not cease, but the whiteout lifted, leaving behind a landscape scoured clean and frozen hard as a bone. Eli Turner did not waste the reprieve. He attacked the broken spine of the homestead with a quiet, relentless energy, as if by fixing the fence line he could somehow repair the jagged edges of his own life. He started with the barn roof. It was a treacherous job, the shingles slick with frost and the wind trying to peel him off the rafters. But he hammered with a steady cadence that echoed across the empty plains. From his vantage point, high up, he watched May Kincaid. She did not stay inside. She had told him she didn't need help, that she could manage, but the lie was evident in the dark circles under her eyes and the way she favored her left hip when she thought he wasn't looking. Yet, she refused to be a spectator on her own land. While Eli patched the roof, May was below, resetting the corral posts that the frost heave had pushed out of true. She worked with a brute strength that made Eli pause his hammer mid-swing. She wrapped a chain around a leaning post, hooked it to the single tree of her gray mare, and drove the horse forward, guiding the heavy timber back into place with her shoulder. She was covered in mud, her hem soaked, her breath pluming in the cold air. Eli climbed down at midday to drink water from the ladle at the well. May was there, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of a dirty glove. "You're going to burn that mare out if you keep pulling stumps like that," Eli said, leaning against the well housing. May stiffened, her defenses rising instantly. "The mare is fine, and the post needed setting." "I'm not saying the work doesn't need doing," Eli said, his voice even. "I am saying I can do the heavy pulls. That is what I am here for. Isn't it? To work off a debt?" May looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She looked at his hands, which were already raw from the shingles. "I do not need you to save me, Mr. Turner. I have run this place alone for 3 years." "I can see that," Eli said, "and you are tired. May—" The word hung in the air between them. It was not an insult. It was a fact, plain as the sky. May opened her mouth to argue, to snap back with her usual armor of pride, but the fight drained out of her. She slumped slightly, just an inch, but it was a concession. "We are low on feed," she said, shifting the subject. "How low?" 2 weeks. If we ration, the winter wheat is gone. I've got to calculate the grain for the chickens versus the horses. If the snow holds off, I can drive the herd to the south pasture where the grass is taller, but if it snows again—" She trailed off, her gaze drifting to the horizon. Eli began to understand the mathematics of her survival. It was a constant, exhausting subtraction. Every cup of water, every scoop of oats, every stick of firewood was measured against the length of the winter. She carried these numbers in her head like a heavy stone. "We will move them Thursday," Eli said. "I will ride point. You take the flank." May looked at him, surprised that he had stepped into her equation without asking permission. She nodded once, sharp and quick. "Thursday." She agreed. The crisis came 2 nights later, not from the weather, but from the herd. Eli was sleeping in the loft, buried under 3 wool blankets, when the barn door creaked open below. He was awake instantly, his hand going to the Colt Navy revolver near his pillow. "Eli?" It was May's voice, tight and strained. He peered over the edge of the loft. She was standing in the center aisle, holding a lantern. The yellow light threw her shadow long and distorted against the stalls. "What is it?" Eli asked, swinging his legs down the ladder. "It is the white-faced calf. She said, the late one. He is down. He won't nurse." Eli pulled his boots on and dropped to the floor. He followed her to the pen at the back of the barn. The calf, a scrawny thing born too late in the season to have much fat on him, was lying on its side in the straw. Its breathing was shallow and raspy, a wet sound that rattled in its small chest. The mother cow stood nearby, lowing softly, distressed. "Scours?" Eli asked, kneeling beside the animal. "Pneumonia, I think. Or the cold got deep in him. He was shivering an hour ago. Now he is too hot." May knelt on the other side, her face pale in the lantern light. She looked terrified. It wasn't just a calf to her. It was money. It was survival. Losing a head of stock meant less to sell in the spring, which meant less money for seed, which meant another year of suffocating debt. "We need to break the fever," Eli said. "Do you have blankets? Whiskey?" "In the tack room," May said. For the next 6 hours, they waged a war against death in the freezing draft of the barn. They moved with a singular purpose, speech becoming unnecessary. Eli lifted the calf's front quarters, the animal dead weight in his arms, while May packed straw and wool blankets around its torso. She forced a mixture of warm milk and a splash of corn whiskey down the animal's throat from a bottle, her hands gentle but firm. The space in the stall was cramped. As they worked, their bodies became parts of the same machine. Eli held the calf's head. May rubbed its flanks vigorously with a burlap sack to stimulate circulation. "Faster," she whispered, panic edging her voice. "He is getting colder. I've got him," Eli said. "Keep rubbing." They shifted positions, and for a moment, they were pressed together in the straw. Eli's shoulder brushed against hers. Through the layers of wool and cotton, he felt the heat of her, the solid, living reality of her body. It was electric, a sudden shock of contact that made the air in the stall feel thin. May froze for a second, her hand stilling on the calf's flank. She looked up, her face inches from his. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown black in the dim light. He could smell the soap she washed with and the scent of hay and the metallic tang of fear. "Don't stop," Eli said, his voice rougher than he intended. May ducked her head and resumed rubbing. Harder now, as if trying to erase the moment. The night dragged on. The lantern sputtered and had to be refilled. The cold seeped through the barn walls, turning their breath to clouds that mingled in the air. Eli's arms burned with the effort of holding the calf upright, keeping the fluid from settling in its lungs. Just before dawn, the rhythm of the calf's breathing changed. The rattles smoothed out. The animal gave a sudden, sharp kick and lifted its head, bleating weakly for its mother. May gasped. She sat back on her heels, the burlap sack falling from her hands. "He is up," she whispered. "Look, he is up." The calf struggled to its knees, shaking, but alive. It butted its head against Eli's chest. Eli laughed, a low, tired sound of relief. "He looks like he has some fight left in him after all." May looked at the calf, then at Eli. The tension that had held her face in a rigid mask all night suddenly cracked. She let out a sound, half sob, half laugh, that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. It was a rusty sound, unused and sharp, but it was genuine. "I thought he was gone," she said, wiping her face with a dirty sleeve. "I really thought he was gone. You didn't let him go," Eli said softly. He was looking at her, and she caught him doing it. Her hair had escaped its pins and hung in loose, dark strands around her face. There was straw on her coat. She looked exhausted and wild and undeniably alive. May's smile faded, replaced by that familiar, guarded wariness. She stood up quickly, brushing the straw from her skirt. "I will finish up here," she said, her voice regaining its command. "Go get some coffee. You have done enough." Eli didn't argue. He knew when the walls were going back up, but as he walked back to the house, the sound of her startled laugh stayed with him, warmer than the rising sun. The victory with the calf was short-lived. 2 days later, a rider appeared on the horizon, a black silhouette against the gray sky. It was a deputy from the county sheriff's office. He did not look like a man coming to offer aid. He sat on a tall bay horse, a man with a thick mustache and eyes that slid over the property with a mixture of boredom and disdain. May stood on the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. Eli was by the woodpile, axe in hand, watching. "Maeve Kincaid," the deputy called out. Not bothering to dismount, May stepped forward. "I am Mrs. Kincaid. Got a notice for you, from the county seat." He leaned down and extended a folded piece of paper. May took it. Her hand did not shake, but Eli saw the color drain from her face as she saw the wax seal. To her, that seal did not mean justice. It meant power, and power had never been on her side. She unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the dense legal script. "This says there is a dispute," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "About the southern boundary." "That is right," the deputy said, chewing on a toothpick. "Voss Cattle Company filed a survey. Says your fence line is encroaching on their water access. You got 30 days to contest or the line moves." 30 days? May crumpled the paper slightly. "It is winter. I cannot get a surveyor out here in winter. Not my problem. Widow," the deputy said. "I just deliver the paper." He turned his horse, his gaze landing on Eli. He looked Eli up and down, noting the worn coat and the way Eli held the axe. "You the hired help?" the deputy asked, a smirk touching his lips. Something like that, Eli said coolly. The deputy chuckled. Heard you had a man out here. Good luck, friend. You are gonna need it. With that, he spurred his horse and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence that felt heavy as lead. May stood frozen on the porch. She looked at the paper as if it were a rattlesnake. It is a lie, she whispered. Frank walked those lines. The markers are stone. They cannot just move them. It is just paper. May, Eli said, walking toward her. It is a scare tactic. Voss wants the water, so he pays a lawyer to write a letter. They can take it, she said, looking up at him. Her eyes were wide with a fear that wasn't about land. It was about helplessness. If I go to court, they will laugh at me. They always do. They will say I am confused, or crazy, or that a woman cannot read a map. I can go, Eli offered. I can ride to the county seat tomorrow. Check the original deed at the recorder's office. If the markers are filed, Voss hasn't got a leg to stand on. No, May said instantly. Why not? Because... She hesitated, looking at the ground. Because I cannot leave the ranch. Not with the herd like this. Not with the fire danger. I will go alone, Eli said. You stay here. May shook her head violently. No, I don't trust them to talk to you, and I don't trust you to come back. The words were out before she could stop them. She looked stricken. Eli went very still. I told you I would stay until the storm season breaks. I keep my word. May turned away, gripping the porch railing. It is not about your word, Eli. It is about what happens when men like that see a weakness. They will tear this place apart if I am not here to hold it together. And if you go, and they find out who you are, or if you just decide the trouble isn't worth the wages. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Eli saw the trap she was in. She was terrified of the law because it had failed her. And she was terrified of being alone because the world was waiting to consume her. We will figure it out, Eli said gently. But first, we need supplies. Real supplies. If we are going to be under siege, we need to be ready. Going to town was unavoidable. The wagon ride to Bitter Creek was tense. The sky was a flat sheet of slate, threatening snow that hadn't fallen yet. May sat stiffly on the buckboard seat, her hat pulled low. She wore her best dress, a dark navy wool that was clean but dated, and a heavy shawl. She tried to make herself small, which was impossible. She was a woman built of grand proportions, broad shoulders, tall stature, and the town seemed to shrink around her, making her look even larger. They stopped at the blacksmith's first. The big man, Silas, was hammering a horseshoe. He stopped when Eli and May entered. I need the team reshod, May said, her voice steady, and the plow blade needs an edge. Silas wiped his hands on his apron. He didn't look at May. He looked at the wall over her shoulder. Iron is up. Mrs. Kincaid. $4 for the shoes. $2 for the blade. That is double what you charged me in the spring, May said, her voice rising. Winter rates, Silas grunted. Take it or leave it. Eli stepped forward. He saw the gleam in Silas's eye. It wasn't economics. It was a tax on her existence. $2 for the shoes. Eli said quietly. $1 for the blade. That is the going rate. Silas looked at Eli, his lip curling. I don't haggle with drifters, and I don't haggle with her. May put a hand on Eli's arm. It was a warning grip, hard and desperate. Pay him, she whispered. Just pay him. Eli felt the anger coiling in his gut, hot and sharp. He wanted to reach across the anvil and throttle the man, but he felt May's hand, the tremor in it. A fight would only prove the town right, that she brought trouble. He counted out the $6. He slammed the coins onto the anvil with enough force that they rang like bells. Have it done by noon, Eli said. They walked out into the street. The air was cold, but the stairs were colder. A group of children playing with a hoop in the dirt stopped as May passed. They whispered behind their hands, eyes wide. That is her, one boy hissed. The monster. My PA says she eats raw meat. Look how big she is, a girl whispered. She is a giant. May kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. but Eli saw her jaw muscle jump. She was walking through a gauntlet of small cuts, bleeding from 1,000 invisible wounds. They went to the mercantile, then the feed store, everywhere. It was the same. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Higgins, swept past them on the boardwalk, pulling her skirts aside as if May were contagious. She offered a loud, cheerful greeting to a woman behind them, pointedly ignoring May's existence. It was near the livery stable that the dam finally broke. A traveling peddler had set up a cart. He was a greasy man with a bowler hat and a smile that showed too many gums. He was selling patent medicines and cheap ribbons. A few men were gathered around, laughing. As May and Eli walked past, the peddler's eyes snagged on May. He whistled, a low, ugly sound. "Lord Almighty, look at the size of that heifer," the peddler said, loud enough for the street to hear. "You could hitch her to a plow and save the ox for eating." The men laughed. It was a crude, brutal sound. May stumbled slightly. She stopped, her face burning a deep, painful red. She looked at the ground, wishing it would open up and swallow her. Eli stopped too. The silence that came over him was sudden and terrifying. He let go of the sack of feed he was carrying. It hit the ground with a heavy thud. "Eli?" "No," May whispered. Eli walked over to the peddler. The man was still grinning, playing to his audience. He didn't see the look in Eli's eyes until it was too late. Eli reached out and grabbed the man by his lapels. He didn't punch him. He yanked him forward, lifting him up onto his toes, and slammed him back against the side of the wagon. Bottles of tonic rattled and fell, shattering on the boardwalk. The laughter died instantly. The peddler sputtered, his eyes bulging. "Hey, you have got a tongue in your head," Eli said, his voice a low rumble, intimate and dangerous. "You used it to insult a lady. Now you are going to use it to apologize." The peddler looked around for help, but the local men stepped back. Eli Turner wasn't a big man like Silas, but he had the look of a wolf that had been cornered one too many times. "I didn't mean nothing," the peddler stammered. "Apologize," Eli said. He tightened his grip, twisting the fabric until the man gagged. "Sorry," the peddler gasped out, looking at May. "I am sorry, ma'am, just a joke." Eli held him for a second longer, letting the fear sink in. Then he shoved the man away. The peddler stumbled and fell into the mud. Eli turned back to May. He expected to see relief. Instead, he saw fury. May turned on her heel and marched toward the wagon, climbing up so fast the springs groaned. Eli grabbed the feed sack and followed. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. She didn't speak until they were a mile out of town, the buildings just a smudge on the horizon. "You shouldn't have done that," she hissed. "He insulted you," Eli said. "I am used to insults," May shouted. Her voice cracked. "Do you think you are the first man to defend my honor? Do you think that helps? Now they will say I set you on him. They will say I am violent by proxy. Every time there is a fight, it gets written down in their heads as proof that I am dangerous." She was shaking. Eli realized then that for May, protection looked like danger. Attention was a threat. She survived by being invisible, and he had just put a spotlight on her. "I couldn't let him speak to you like that," Eli said quietly. "You don't get to decide what I can handle," May snapped. "I don't need a knight. Eli, I need to be left alone." She turned away from him, staring out at the empty prairie. The silence in the wagon was thick with things unsaid. Eli drove the horses, his hands tight on the leather, realizing that defending her was going to be harder than fighting for her. That evening, the tension in the cabin was brittle. They moved around each other carefully. Eli had torn his shirt in the scuffle with the peddler. The seam at the shoulder had given way when he lunged. He sat by the fire, trying clumsily to thread a needle with his calloused fingers. May watched him from the sink where she was washing dishes. Finally, she sighed, a sound of surrender. "Give it here," she said. She dried her hands and walked over. Eli hesitated, then handed her the shirt. He sat in his undershirt, the firelight casting shadows on his ribs. He was lean, scarred from a life of hard riding and harder falls. May sat on the stool beside him. She began to stitch the tear. Her head was bent, her focus absolute. Eli watched her. He was close enough to smell the sage soap on her skin. He watched her eyelashes flutter against her cheek. The anger from the afternoon had faded into a dull ache. May finished the seam. She leaned in to bite the thread, as she did. Her hand rested on his rib cage to steady herself. Her fingers were warm. They grazed the skin over his ribs, a light, unintentional touch. Eli's breath hitched. It was a sharp intake of air, involuntary and loud in the quiet room. May froze. Her hand burned against his skin. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The air between them was suddenly charged, heavy with a hunger that had been growing for weeks. Then May pulled back as if she had been burned. She stood up, the shirt clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with panic. "No," she said, her voice rough. "May—" Eli started, reaching out. "No." She backed away. "New rule. No touching. Unless it is life or death. Eli, no touching." She threw the shirt at him. It landed on his lap. I can't have you confusing things," she said, her chest heaving. "I can't have you thinking this is something it isn't. I am not confused, May," Eli said softly. But she was already retreating to her side of the room, putting the table between them. "Keep your distance," she warned. "Please." Eli pulled the shirt on. He nodded slowly. "All right, if that is what you need." "It is," she said. The weather turned 2 days later. A cold, miserable rain swept in, turning the world to mud. It trapped them inside the cabin. The work outside was impossible. They sat at the table, a deck of worn cards between them. The lamp flickered. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm on the roof. They played 7-Up. The stakes were matches. The constraint of the no-touching rule hung over them, but the physical distance somehow forced an emotional closeness. They talked. At first, it was small things. The horses, the best way to cure hay, the taste of the coffee, which was getting weaker as the beans ran low. Then, the silence stretched too long, and Eli filled it. "I had a place once," he said, staring at his cards. "In Kansas." May didn't look up. "She played a 10. What happened to it?" "Left it. After Sarah died." May's hand paused on the deck. "Sarah, my wife. And our girl, Clara." He put a card down. It was the first time he had spoken their names in 3 years. The words felt heavy, like stones he was taking out of his pockets. "It was on the trail," Eli said. "We were heading to Oregon. Thought it would be greener. It wasn't Indians or bandits, just bad water. Sarah got sick first, then the baby. It took 3 days." He looked at the flame in the lamp. "It was ordinary," he said. "That is the worst part. It happens to everyone. It wasn't a tragedy to the world, just to me. I buried them by a river I didn't know the name of, and I turned around and rode back. Couldn't go forward alone." He looked at May. He expected pity. He hated pity. It was what people gave you when they didn't know what else to say. But May wasn't looking at him with pity. She was looking at him with recognition. She knew what it was to have a hole in the center of your life that the wind blew through. She didn't reach out to pat his hand. She didn't offer a platitude about God's will. "That is a hard thing to carry," she said simply. She dealt the next card. That steadiness, that refusal to try and fix him or soften the edge of his pain, felt like an embrace. It was an intimacy deeper than skin. That night, the rain turned to sleet. Eli slept in the corner of the cabin again. The barn being too cold and damp, he was awoken by a sound, a gasp, a choke. He sat up, in the dim light of the dying coals. He saw May thrashing in her bed. She was caught in a nightmare, fighting invisible hands. "No," she whimpered. "No, Frank, don't, please." She sat bolt upright, gasping for air, clutching her throat like she was drowning. Eli was on his feet in an instant. He rushed to the side of her bed. "May!" He reached for her, his hands hovering over her shoulders to shake her awake, and then he stopped. He remembered the rule. No touching. He froze, his hands inches from her trembling form. "May, wake up!" he called out instead. May's eyes flew open. They were unseeing, blind with terror. She flailed out, her hands searching in the dark. She found Eli's wrist. She grabbed him with a grip that was desperate, her fingers digging into his skin. She anchored herself to him, pulling him down slightly. Eli didn't pull away. He stayed there, half kneeling, letting her crush his wrist. He felt the tremors running through her body. He felt the heat of her skin. For a long, suspended moment, the rule was broken. Hand to hand, trembling to trembling, she held on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. Then, the reality of the room returned. May blinked, her eyes focusing on his face. She saw him. She saw her hand gripping his. She let go as if he were red-hot iron. She scrambled back against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. "I am sorry," she stammered. "I was dreaming." "It is all right," Eli said, his voice gentle. "You are safe." May turned her face away. She was ashamed, not of the nightmare, but of the need. She had shown him the crack in the armor. She had reached for him. "Go back to sleep." "Eli," she whispered into her knees. Eli stood up slowly. He rubbed his wrist where her fingernails had left crescent moon indentations. He walked back to his pallet in the corner. He lay down, but he didn't close his eyes. He stared at the rough timber of the ceiling, listening to May's breathing slowly even out. He realized then that the math had changed. He wasn't counting the days until the storm season broke anymore. He wasn't thinking about the wages or the next town. He was staying, not because he needed the work, not because he had nowhere else to go. He was staying because the thought of leaving her alone in the dark, fighting those ghosts by herself, was a kind of dying he couldn't survive. He closed his eyes, the sensation of her hand on his wrist still burning, and knew he was in trouble deep enough to drown in. The war for the Kincaid homestead did not begin with gunfire. It began with the quiet, suffocating rustle of paper. 2 weeks after the boundary notice, a rider from the Voss Cattle Company arrived. He was not a rough hand, but a man in a clean suit that looked out of place against the dusty backdrop of the plains. He sat on a nervous sorrel mare and spoke to May from the other side of the fence. Never dismounting, he told her, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, that Harlan Voss was a reasonable man. He claimed that a review of the county archives suggested May's deed was invalid, a clerical error from years ago that nullified her water rights to the creek. He offered her a price for the land. It was a fraction of what the earth was worth, barely enough to buy a ticket east, let alone start a new life. When he left, May stood gripping the fence post until her knuckles turned the color of old bone. Eli stood behind her, watching the dust settle. He saw the way her shoulders hunched, not in defeat, but in the bracing posture of someone expecting a whip. "They are lying," Eli said. May turned. Her face was gray. "It might not matter if they are lying. Eli, when Frank died, the papers were a mess. I didn't understand the law. I couldn't read the legal script well back then. 2 men from town, friends of the bank, came out to help. They took the ledgers. They took the deed to get it updated. They said they were handling it for the widow." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "I let them. I was so relieved to have him gone. I didn't care what papers they signed. I just wanted the silence." Eli looked at her. He heard the tremor in her voice, the vibration of a regret that had been festering for 3 years. "I am going to the county seat," Eli said. "No," May said immediately. "I told you. You told me you couldn't leave." Eli interrupted. "You didn't say I couldn't." He walked past her toward the barn to saddle the bay. "I know how to read a land survey, May, and I know how men like Voss work. They don't offer money if the law is truly on their side. If the deed was invalid, they would just take it. The offer means they are scared of something in that paperwork." May followed him, grabbing his arm. Eli stopped. He looked down at her hand, large and calloused, gripping his sleeve. "It is dangerous," she whispered. "I am not using my name." Eli said, "I have got a name I can borrow, an old friend who doesn't need it anymore. I will ride in, check the books, and ride out. One day." May looked at him, searching for the hesitation that wasn't there. She slowly released his arm. "Come back," she said. "That is an order." The county seat was a sprawling, ugly town built on the ambition of silver miners and cattle barons. Eli left his horse at a livery on the outskirts and walked to the courthouse, pulling his hat low. He moved with the nondescript shuffle of a drifter looking for day labor, a man easily ignored. Inside the Hall of Records, the air smelled of dry rot and ink. The clerk was asleep at his desk. Eli bypassed him and went to the shelves where the land claims for 1868 were housed. He spent 4 hours turning pages that felt like dried skin. He traced the lines of the township, the range markers, the water rights. He found May's deed. It was there, recorded in black and white, legally sound. The signature of the original surveyor was clear, but on the very next page, he found the contradiction. A second claim had been filed 3 weeks after Frank Kincaid's death. It was a correction of boundary, filed by a man named Silas Thorne, claiming that the creek access belonged to the adjacent parcel, land now owned by Harlan Voss. Eli stared at the signature on the witness line of the second claim. J. Miller. He knew that name. Miller was the foreman for the Voss outfit. The man who had signed the claim that stole May's water was the same man now paid to run cattle on that land. It was a clear conflict of interest, a fraud plain as day, but it had been buried in a book no one had opened in years. Eli closed the ledger. He had what he needed. Voss wasn't standing on the law. He was standing on a lie he had paid for. Eli slipped out of the courthouse as the sun began to dip. He felt a grim satisfaction. Proof was ammunition. He rode out of town fast, intending to make the homestead by midnight. The moon was a sliver of ice in the sky, offering little light. He was 10 miles from the Kincaid property, crossing a dry riverbed lined with cottonwoods. When the shadows detached themselves from the trees, there were 3 of them. They didn't call out a challenge. A rope hissed through the dark and settled over Eli's chest, pinning his arms. Before he could spur the bay, the rope went taut. He was jerked backward out of the saddle, hitting the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of him. Boots hit the dirt. Eli tried to scramble up, gasping for air, but a boot heel slammed into his ribs. He heard the crack before he felt the pain, a sharp, sickening snap that turned his vision white. "Stay down," a voice growled. Eli curled into a ball, protecting his head, but they weren't looking for a fight. They were delivering a message. They kicked him with a methodical, dispassionate efficiency. They kicked his legs, his back, his stomach. One of them grabbed a handful of his hair and yanked his head back. Eli stared up into a face covered by a bandana. "You drift, cowboy," the man said. "You drift, or the next time we put you in the ground instead of on it." They released him. One of the men slapped Eli's horse on the rump with a quirt. The bay squealed and bolted into the night. The riders mounted up and vanished, leaving Eli lying in the dirt, the taste of copper filling his mouth. He lay there for a long time. The cold seeped into his clothes. Every breath was a negotiation with the broken ribs. He could have stayed there. It would have been easy to let the cold take him. But the image of May standing by the fence, waiting, burned in his mind. He rolled onto his stomach. He pushed himself up to his hands and knees. He began to crawl. It took him hours to find his feet. He walked with a staggering, broken gait, holding his side. He fell twice. He got up twice. He walked on stubbornness alone, a refusal to let Voss win this small, violent victory. May found him at the edge of the yard just as dawn was breaking. He had collapsed near the trough. The dogs were barking, a frantic sound that had pulled her from the house with her rifle raised. When she saw the heap of denim and sheepskin in the dirt, she dropped the rifle. Eli! She was on her knees beside him in a second. She turned him over gently. His face was a mask of blood and bruising. One eye was swollen shut. His breathing was shallow and hitched. May didn't scream. She didn't cry. A terrifying calm settled over her features. It was the coldness of a woman who knew violence intimately, who knew that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She hooked her arms under his shoulders. He groaned, a raw sound of pain. "I have got you," she whispered. "I have got you." She dragged him into the house, her strength fueled by a rage that burned white-hot in her chest. She got him onto the bed, her bed, the only one soft enough, and began to strip off his dirty layers. She heated water. She tore a clean sheet into strips. She worked with the same efficiency she used to dress a deer, but her hands were trembling now. Eli opened his good eye. He looked at her. "The deed," he rasped, his voice bubbling. "It is real. They forged. The second one." "Hush," May said. She was washing the grit from a cut on his cheek. "Hush now." She cut his shirt open. When she saw the purple-black bruising spreading across his ribs, her breath hitched. "They did this," she said, her voice flat. "Voss's men. They warned me. To leave." May paused. She looked at the door, then back at him. "You should have—" Eli managed a weak, bloody grin. "I like the food here too much." May didn't smile. She turned away to wring out the cloth, and Eli saw her shoulders shaking. She wasn't crying. She was vibrating with anger. She turned back, her eyes dry and hard. "This is what men do," she said bitterly. "This is all they know. They break things that won't bend." She began to bandage his ribs, wrapping the linen tight to support the bone. As she worked, her guard slipped. Frank was like them, she said quietly. Eli watched her face. It was the first time she had spoken of her husband with anything other than vague deflection. He wasn't a good man. "Eli," she continued, her hands moving over his skin. "People think I stayed out here alone because I was grieving, because I loved him so much I couldn't bear to leave his land." She tied the knot on the bandage. "I stayed because I was finally safe." Eli lay still, letting the words settle in the room. "He didn't hit me often," May said, looking at her hands. "He was smarter than that. He knew bruises showed. He liked to mark what he owned in other ways, private ways, places people wouldn't look." She looked at the window, at the gray light of morning. "That is why the town hates me. They think I killed him. And maybe I did, in my heart, 1,000 times before he actually died. When the horse kicked him, when I saw him lying there in the mud, I didn't feel sadness. I felt air coming back into my lungs." She looked down at Eli. Her eyes were dark pools of old pain. "That is the secret," she whispered. "Not that I am a monster, but that I survived a monster. And I am not sorry he is gone. And now they want to punish me for that too." Eli reached out. His hand, battered and swollen, covered hers. "You are not a monster. May," he said, "you are the strongest thing I have ever known." May looked at their hands. She didn't pull away this time. By evening, Eli's fever had spiked. The infection from the cuts and the trauma to his body sent him into a delirium. He tossed on the bed, murmuring names May didn't know. Sarah, Clara, calling out to ghosts. May sat beside him, changing the cool compresses on his forehead. She had to strip him down to his undergarments to sponge his skin with cool water to bring the temperature down. It was a clinical act. It had to be. She washed his chest, his arms, his legs, but the intimacy of it burned her. She was touching him, seeing the map of his own scars, the history written on his skin. She washed his neck, and Eli's eyes fluttered open. He wasn't seeing the room. He was seeing something else, somewhere else. He looked at her. His gaze was soft, unguarded, stripped of all the hesitation that usually stood between them. "You are beautiful," he murmured. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. May froze, her hand hovering over his shoulder. Her face tightened instantly, her eyes squeezing shut as if she were bracing for a physical blow. She pulled her head back, tucking her chin, a reflex born of years where a compliment was often the prelude to a demand, and a demand was the prelude to pain. She waited for the twist. She waited for the sneer. It didn't come. Eli's eyes drifted shut again, his breathing deepening into sleep. May let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at him, at the gentle line of his mouth. She touched her own face, wondering what he could possibly see that was beautiful in a woman carved from rock and silence. 2 days later, Eli was sitting up. He was stiff, moving like an old man. But the fever had broken. "We have to go to the judge," he said. He was sitting at the table, drinking willow bark tea. I saw the ledger. May Miller signed it. We can prove fraud. May was kneading dough at the counter. She pounded the flour with a rhythmic, heavy force. No judge will listen to us, she said. Not against Voss. Voss owns the county seat. The law is the law. Eli insisted. The law is a tool for men like him. May snapped. It doesn't work for people like us. She was interrupted by the sound of horses in the yard. Many horses. May went to the window. Her face went pale. It is the sheriff, she said, and he has brought a posse. Eli stood up, wincing as his ribs protested. He grabbed his gun belt from the chair, but May put a hand on his chest. No, she said. If you walk out there with a gun, they will shoot you and call it self-defense. You are a drifter. No one will miss you. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Eli stood in the doorway, his hand near his hip, watching. Sheriff Brady was a thick-set man with a face like a bulldog. He sat heavily on his horse, flanked by 6 men. One of them was the deputy who had delivered the notice. Mrs. Kincaid. The sheriff said. Sheriff, May said. To what do I owe the visit? Tax collection. The sheriff said. He pulled a ledger from his saddlebag. Seems there is a discrepancy in your filings for the last 3 years. Back taxes on the improvement of the barn and the livestock count. You owe the county $200. Payable immediately. $200. May's voice rose. That is impossible. I paid my taxes in the spring. I have the receipts. The assessor reevaluated, the sheriff said, shrugging. The county needs its coin. You pay now, or we seize the property to cover the debt. This isn't about taxes, Eli called out from the doorway. This is Voss trying to squeeze her out. The sheriff looked at Eli. Well, look at that. The hired man is still breathing. Heard you took a tumble. Son. Eli stepped onto the porch. He ignored the threat. You know this is false. Sheriff, I know what the paper says. The sheriff said $200. I don't have it, May said. You know I don't have that kind of cash on hand. Then we seized the assets. The sheriff said. He signaled to his men. Search the barn. Search the house. See if there is anything of value we can hold until the auction. You are not coming in my house, May said, blocking the door. Stand aside. Widow, the deputy sneered. Unless you are hiding something. Heard rumors you got all sorts of contraband in there. Or maybe just secrets. The men dismounted. They moved with a casual arrogance, kicking over a bucket, pushing past the chickens. It was a humiliation disguised as procedure. They were invading her sanctuary. I have a saddle, Eli said quickly. It is a custom rig, worth $40. And the colt, he started to unbuckle his gun belt. Keep your gun. Eli, May said sharply. We are not paying them with your blood money. One of the deputies, a man with yellow teeth, stepped up onto the porch. He looked at May. He stood too close. He sniffed the air. You know, the deputy said, lowering his voice so only May and Eli could hear. The boys in town. They talk. They say you ain't built right underneath that dress. Say you got parts that don't belong to a woman. He grinned. A lewd, hungry expression. Maybe we ought to check that too. For the county assessment, make sure you are what you say you are. May went rigid. The blood left her face, leaving it the color of ash. Her hand twitched. It moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the doorframe. The moment stretched, tight as a bowstring. If she touched that rifle, they would kill her. They were waiting for it. They wanted the excuse. Eli stepped between them. He moved with a speed that belied his broken ribs. He placed his body directly in front of May, shielding her from the deputy's gaze. He didn't draw his gun. He just stood there, a wall of focused aggression. You take one more step, Eli said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout, and I will kill you. I won't draw. I will just take your throat out with my hands. The deputy blinked. He looked into Eli's eyes and saw a calm, absolute certainty. This wasn't a bluff. This was a man who had nothing left to lose. The deputy took a step back. Enough, the sheriff called out, sensing the line was about to be crossed. We will take the herd. The herd? May cried out, stepping around Eli. "You can't take the herd." "That is my livelihood. It covers the debt," the sheriff said. "Boys, round them up." May watched helplessly as the men rode into the pasture. They shouted and whipped the cattle, driving the small herd. Her survival, her winter money, her sweat and blood. Toward the road, she stood on the porch, trembling. Not with fear, but with a rage so potent it made her dizzy. The sheriff tipped his hat mockingly. "You got 30 days to redeem the property, Mrs. Kincaid, or we sell the land too." They rode off, the dust swallowing the herd. The silence in the cabin that night was a living thing. May sat at the table. She hadn't lit the lamp. She sat in the dark, her hands flat on the wood. Eli stood by the stove. He wanted to offer hope. He wanted to say they could fight this, but he knew words were useless against what had just happened. May spoke first. Her voice was hollow. "Do you know what they say?" she asked. Eli turned. "Don't listen to them. May, they say I am a hermaphrodite." She said the word was ugly in the quiet room, or that I was born turned inside out. "They say Frank married me for a sideshow." She stood up. She walked toward him, in the moonlight coming through the window. She looked immense and fragile all at once. "They want to see," she whispered. "They all want to see. It is not enough to take my land. They want to strip me. They want to verify the monster." She stopped in front of him. She began to undo the buttons of her bodice. "May, don't," Eli said. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, her voice breaking. "Because you are wondering too. You are the only one who hasn't asked, but you must be wondering why I am like this, why I recoil when you touch me, why I hide." She pulled the fabric down. She turned her shoulder to the moonlight. It wasn't a deformity of birth. It was a map of cruelty. Scars crisscrossed her skin. Cigarette burns. The jagged white line of a knife cut that ran from her collarbone down to her breast, and lower, on her ribs. The dark, uneven texture of bones that had been broken and set wrong. "Frank," she whispered. "He didn't just hit, he carved. He wanted to make sure that if I ever left, no other man would want to look at me without flinching. He made me into something ruined." She looked at Eli, tears finally spilling over. "Hot and fast. I'm not a monster. Eli, I'm just a map of what he did, and I don't let people see because I won't let them turn my pain into a story they tell in the saloon. I won't be their entertainment." She stood there, shivering, waiting for him to look away, waiting for the disgust. Eli stepped closer. He didn't look at the scars. He looked straight into her eyes. "I don't need to see," he said. He reached out, his hands hovering, then gently, with infinite care, he pulled the fabric of her dress back up to cover her shoulder. He buttoned the top button. "I don't need proof that you are a woman, May, and I don't need to know what he did to know that you survived it." He cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the tears. "I just want you alive," he said. "I want you here. I don't care about the scars. I care about the woman standing in the middle of them." May looked at him. She saw the truth in his face. He wasn't horrified. He was furious for her, not at her. Something inside her, a dam that had held for 3 years, finally broke. She didn't think. She surged forward. She kissed him. It wasn't a soft, romantic kiss. It was fierce. It was desperate. It was a collision. She grabbed his face, pulling him down to her, her mouth crushing against his. It was a claiming. She was taking one pure thing from a world that had given her nothing but dirt. Eli made a low sound in his throat and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against his broken ribs, ignoring the pain. He kissed her back with a hunger that matched hers, a promise of shelter. For 10 seconds, they were the only two people on earth. Then May pulled away. She stumbled back, her chest heaving. Her hand went to her mouth. She looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. She realized what she had done. She had let him in. She had given him the power to hurt her in a way Frank never could. "May," Eli started. "No," she whispered. "No." She turned and ran into her bedroom, slamming the door. The bolt slid home with a definitive click. Eli stood alone in the dark kitchen. his lips still burning, his heart hammering against his ribs. He walked to the window. He looked out at the night, trying to make sense of the shift in the universe. Then he saw it. In the distance, to the north, a bright orange glow was blooming against the black sky. It grew rapidly, licking upward, consuming the dark. It was the haystack, the winter feed. Voss's riders hadn't just taken the herd. They had circled back. They were burning them out. Eli watched the fire rage, casting a blood-red light over the snow. The paperwork was done. The law was done. The war had begun. The fire died hard. It took the rest of the night and the better part of the morning to beat the flames down into a sullen, hissing mass of black ash. The haystack, which represented the winter feed for the stock, was gone. It lay across the snow like a dark scar, smoking in the gray light of dawn. May Kincaid stood by the ruined fence, her face smeared with soot, her chest heaving. She held a wet burlap sack in her hand, her knuckles white. The air tasted of charred grass and defeat. Eli stood a few yards away, leaning on a shovel. He was coughing, a deep, rattling sound that shook his bruised ribs. The bandage May had wrapped around him 2 days ago was gray with ash. "They are gone," May said, her voice raspy. "The feed. The sheriff took the main herd. Now the hay is gone." Eli spat a glob of black phlegm into the snow. "Not all of them." May looked at him. "The sheriff took the lot. He took what he could drive easy." Eli said, he wiped his mouth with the back of his glove. "But I saw tracks heading into the scrub oak in the deep draw. The smart ones scattered. The wild ones. If we ride out now, we can round them up." May looked at the smoking ruins. "And do what with them? We have got no hay to feed them. If we keep them here, they starve. If we let them go, we starve. We don't keep them," Eli said. "We drive them." "Drive them where?" May asked. "To the slaughterhouse in Bitter Creek? Voss controls that too. He will pay pennies on the dollar, if he pays at all. Not Bitter Creek," Eli said. "Oak Haven. Oak Haven is 60 miles, May said, her eyes widening. "Through the Badlands. In November, it is a market town," Eli said. "Voss doesn't own the buyers there. We round up the strays, maybe 20 head if we are lucky. We drive them hard. We sell them for cash. Then we hire a lawyer who isn't in Voss's pocket. It is a fool's errand," May said. "We will freeze to death before we get halfway." "Maybe," Eli said. He looked at her, his eyes steady beneath the brim of his soot-stained hat. "But staying here means waiting for them to come back and finish the job. I would rather die on the trail than die waiting." May looked at the house, then at the grave out back, and finally at Eli. She saw the set of his jaw. She saw the refusal to lie down and let the world walk over him. "Saddle the horses," she said. They spent 2 days scouring the brush. The sheriff's men had been lazy, taking the docile cattle near the barn and leaving the difficult ones for the coyotes. May and Eli worked in a grim silence, flushing steers out of the scrub oak, roping the stubborn ones, pushing them into a ragged bunch. They managed to gather 18 head. It was a pathetic herd by cattleman standards, a mix of scrawny yearlings and old steers. But it was all the hope they had left. They set out on a Tuesday morning, under a sky that looked like a sheet of hammered lead. The wind was a constant, physical weight against them, driving needle-sharp grit into their faces. The land fought them for every mile. The trail to Oak Haven wound through country that God had seemingly made in anger, steep, muddy draws that sucked at the horses' hooves, ridges of sharp volcanic rock that cut leather, and open flats where the wind screamed without interruption. They rode point and flank, swapping positions to keep the blood moving in their limbs. They didn't talk much. The wind stole words before they could be heard. On the 3rd day, they reached the crossing at Iron Creek. It was a narrow choke point controlled by the massive double-bar ranch. A group of 4 men sat on the porch of a line shack, watching the small, sorry herd shuffle past. One of the men, a redhead with a face full of scars, stood up as May rode by. She was bundled in her heavy coat, a scarf wrapped around her face, but her size was unmistakable. "Well, look at that," the redhead called out. "Is that a bear on a horse, or just the Kincaid widow?" The other men laughed. It was the same laughter she had heard her whole life. Sharp, degrading, meant to strip her down. "I heard she ain't a real woman at all," another man shouted. "Heard she is something caught in between, a mule in a dress." May kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. She did not turn. She did not flinch. She rode with her back straight, her gloved hands holding the reins with a loose, easy competence. "Hey," the redhead yelled. "You got a name for that herd, or just leftovers?" Eli dropped back. He turned his horse, his hand resting conspicuously on the pommel of his saddle, near his gun. He didn't draw, but he looked at the men. He looked at them with the cold, dead eyes of a man who had already been beaten half to death and didn't care about the other half. The laughter on the porch faltered. The redhead sat back down. Eli turned his horse and trotted to catch up with May. They camped that night in a hollow near a dry wash. They built a small fire from sagebrush and dried dung. The heat was meager, barely enough to boil coffee. May sat on a rock, staring into the flames. She had taken off her coat to dry it. She was rubbing her left forearm, over and over, a compulsive motion. She was scrubbing at the skin through her wool sleeve, as if trying to erase the words she had heard at the crossing. Eli watched her. He poured a cup of coffee and held it out. May took it, her hand shaking slightly. "They are right. You know," she said softly. "About what?" Eli asked, sitting on the ground near her. "About me being a mule, built for work, not for anything else." Eli poked the fire with a stick. "A mule pulls the plow when the thoroughbred dies of exhaustion," he said. "A mule doesn't quit. I would rather ride with a mule than a show pony any day." It wasn't a compliment in the traditional sense, but it was the only kind May could stomach. It acknowledged her strength without denying her pain. She stopped rubbing her arm. She took a sip of the bitter coffee. "Thank you, Eli." He didn't ask what for. He just nodded, and the silence that settled between them was no longer empty. It was a kind of shelter. The weather turned vicious on the fifth afternoon. The lead sky finally broke, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that turned instantly to sleet. It came down in sheets, soaking through wool and leather in minutes. The temperature plummeted. "We can't stay in the open," Eli shouted over the roar of the wind. The cattle were bawling, turning their tails to the storm, refusing to move. "There is a canyon up ahead," May yelled back. "The box! We can shelter under the overhang." They pushed the herd into the narrow mouth of the canyon. The walls rose up steep and red, blocking the worst of the wind. They found a deep undercut in the rock wall, a cave-like recess that offered dry ground. They drove the horses in, picketing them at the back. The cattle huddled near the entrance, a steaming wall of animal heat. May and Eli collapsed in the center of the dry space. They were shivering violently. The sleet had soaked through their coats, through their shirts, down to the skin. "We have to get dry," Eli stammered, his teeth chattering so hard the words were chopped up. "Hypothermia. It hits fast." May nodded, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. She tried to undo the buttons of her coat, but her fingers were useless frozen claws. Eli reached out. "Let me." He undid the buttons. She didn't pull away. She was too cold to fight. He helped her strip off the heavy, sodden coat, then the vest, then the shirt. It wasn't seduction. It was survival. Wet clothes in this temperature were a death sentence. They stripped down to their undergarments. May kept her chemise on, though it was damp. She wrapped herself in the only dry blanket they had managed to keep rolled in the center of the canvas tarp. "It is not enough," Eli said. He was shaking uncontrollably, his skin pale and blue-tinged in the dim light. "One blanket. We have to share the heat." May looked at him. Her eyes were wide, dark holes in her pale face. The warning screamed in her head, "Hide, cover, protect." But the cold was a knife in her marrow. "Come here," she whispered. They lay down on the canvas, pulling the single wool blanket over them. They curled together, instinct taking over. Eli lay behind her, curling his body around the curve of her back. The contact was a shock. He was ice cold. She was ice cold. But slowly, trapped under the wool, their bodies began to generate a furnace. Eli's arm went over her waist to hold the blanket tight. His hand rested on her stomach. just above the waistband of her bloomers. For a long time, they just shook. The tremors racked their bodies in unison. Then, the warmth began to spread. The shivering subsided into deep, shuddering breaths. The silence in the small cave changed. It shifted from the frantic panic of survival to a heavy, thick awareness. May could feel Eli's breath against the nape of her neck. She could feel the solid wall of his chest against her back. She could feel the beat of his heart. She was terrified, not of him, but of the fact that for the first time in years, she didn't want to run away. "Don't look," she whispered into the dark. Her voice was thin, brittle. "Please, Eli, don't look at me." Eli shifted slightly. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer, pressing her back against him. "I am not looking." "May," he said. His voice was right at her ear, low and rough. "I am just holding you." "You will see the ugly parts," she said, a tear slipping out to wet the dusty canvas under her cheek. "If you get too close, you will see what I am." "I know what you are," Eli said. He moved his hand. His fingers splayed out over her stomach. "Gentle, reverent. You are the woman who saved my life." He said, "You are the woman who held a dying calf all night. You are the fire in the winter." He paused. "I'm not looking for marks, May. I am looking for you. And I promise you, on my life, I will never use what I see against you. I will never make you a spectacle." It wasn't a poem. It was a vow. It was spoken with the flat, iron cadence of a man who treated his word like a contract written in blood. May let out a sob. It was a sound of a wall coming down. She turned in his arms, face to face in the dark, their breath mingling in small white clouds. She couldn't see his eyes, but she could feel his gaze. It wasn't hungry in the way the men in town were hungry. It was steady. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, the stubble, the bruise on his cheekbone. "Eli." She breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the kitchen. That had been an explosion. This was a question. He kissed her slowly, his mouth soft, asking for permission with every press of his lips. May answered. She opened to him. The hunger that flared up wasn't just physical. It was a starving thing, a need to be known, to be touched without pain. When his hand moved to her waist, touching the ridge of a scar, she flinched. He stopped instantly. He didn't pull away. He just stopped, waiting, letting her feel that he was under her command. May exhaled. She took his hand and moved it back. "Yes," she whispered. What happened next was private. It belonged only to the dark and the stone. It wasn't a conquering. It was a shared heat in a frozen world. It was the sound of shaking breaths, of May's tears of relief, of Eli's careful, trembling gentleness. It was the realization that she was not being taken, but that she was choosing to be given. Morning came with a brutal, bright clarity. The sun reflected off the ice, turning the world into a blinding mirror. May woke first. The memory of the night washed over her, and with it came a crushing wave of fear. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest. She looked at Eli, who was still asleep, his face relaxed, younger than she had ever seen it. She had given him everything. She had let him pass the final gate. Now he held the power to destroy her completely. If he woke up and looked at her with regret, or worse, with that smug ownership men got, it would kill her. She scrambled up, dressing quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. Her body felt tender, sore with a strange, aching emotion she didn't have a name for. Eli woke as she was pulling on her boots. He sat up. He didn't lunge for her. He didn't grin. He looked at her, and his eyes were clear. "Morning," he said, voice raspy from sleep. "Morning," May said, not looking at him. Eli didn't push. He stood up and began to dress, turning his back to give her privacy. "I will get the coffee started," he said. "Horses will need to be walked out before we saddle them. They will be stiff." He went to the fire pit and began to coax a flame from the embers. He moved with the same steady, practical rhythm he always had. He poured the water. He checked the cinches on the saddles. He treated her exactly as he had the day before. With respect. He didn't act like he owned her. He acted like she was still May Kincaid, the woman who ran her own spread. When he handed her the coffee cup, their fingers brushed. May flinched, then stopped herself. She looked up at him. Eli smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it reached his eyes. "We are all right, May," he said softly. May took the cup. The panic in her chest receded, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "We are all right," she repeated. Oakhaven was bigger than Bitter Creek. It was a railhead town, noisy with the shriek of train whistles and the bellow of cattle. They rode in 2 days later, the small herd weary but intact. The town didn't welcome them. People stopped on the boardwalks to stare. A giant woman in men's trail clothes and a battered drifter, driving a pathetic string of cattle. They went to the hotel first. May wanted a bath. She wanted to wash the trail and the fear off her skin. The clerk took one look at May, at her size, her dust-stained coat, the rifle scabbard over her shoulder, and shook his head. "No rooms," he said, not looking up from his ledger. "The board outside says vacancy," Eli said, his voice tight. "Not for you," the clerk said. "We don't cater to carnival folk, or whatever she is." Eli's hand twitched, but May stepped in front of him. "Come on," she said quietly. "The livery will have hay." They slept in the loft of the livery stable. It was humiliating, curled up in the straw like vagrants while the sounds of the saloon drifted up from the street. But May held her head high. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for justice. The next morning, they took the cattle to the stockyards. The buyer was a man with a cigar and eyes like polished flint. He walked the line of cattle, poking them with a cane. "Scrub stock." He spat. "Lean, tough meat. I will give you $2 a head. Current market is $5, Eli said, for prime beef." The buyer sneered. "This is dog food. $2. Take it or I walk." He looked at May, standing by the gate, figured a woman alone wouldn't know the difference. He muttered. Eli stepped into the man's space. He didn't raise his voice. "These cattle are corn-fed until last week," Eli said. "They are trail-hardened, not sick, and the lady isn't alone." "You will give us $4.50 a head, or I will drive them to the railhead myself and tell every man on the line that you are trying to cheat a widow." The buyer looked at Eli. He measured the threat. He spat his cigar butt into the mud. $4, the buyer said, "and that is charity." "Done," Eli said. They walked out with $72. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Finding a lawyer was harder than selling the cattle. They went to 3 offices. The first laughed at them. The second politely declined, saying he didn't litigate against the Voss Company. The third simply slammed the door when he saw May. They were standing on the boardwalk, the despair beginning to settle in, when a woman stepped out of a dry goods store. She was older, wearing a severe gray dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been watching them. "You are looking for legal counsel?" she asked. Her voice was dry as dust. "Yes, ma'am," May said. "You won't find it on Main Street," the woman said. "Voss owns these men. Go to the end of Cedar Street. Look for a sign that says Whitaker. He drinks too much and he smells like old books, but he hates Harlan Voss more than he loves money." "Thank you," Eli said. The woman looked at May. She looked her up and down, but there was no mockery in her eyes. Only a strange, sad recognition. "Give him hell." "Dear," she said. Whitaker's office was a disaster. Stacks of paper towered like leaning columns of antiquity. The air was thick with pipe smoke. Whitaker himself was a small, round man with wild white hair and spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. He listened to Eli explain the situation. He looked at the notes Eli had made about the fraudulent filing. He looked at May. He took a long pull from a flask he kept in his desk drawer. "It is a solid case for an injunction," Whitaker said, wiping his mouth. "If the witness on the second claim is on Voss's payroll, it is fraud. We can get a stay of execution on the seizure. Stop the sale. Can you do it?" May asked. "I can file the papers," Whitaker said. "But to make it stick, you will have to testify." Mrs. Kincaid. In open court. I can do that, May said. Whitaker leaned forward. I don't think you understand. Voss's lawyer is a man named Darrow. He is a shark. He will not attack your deed. He will attack you. He will drag every rumor, every whisper, every piece of your private life into the light. He will try to prove you are mentally unstable, or morally depraved, or physically unnatural. He will tear you apart to make the jury look away from the facts. May went still. She looked at her hands. She thought of the courtroom. The eyes, the whispers turned into shouts. Eli put a hand on her arm. We don't have to do this. May, we can take the money and go west, start over. May looked at him. She saw the offer of escape. Then she looked at Whitaker. File the papers. She said, I am done running. Let them look. They left the office with the injunction signed and sealed. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows down the street. They were heading for the livery stable to get the horses when 3 men stepped out of an alleyway. They were wearing long dusters. One of them was Miller, the Voss foreman. Mr. Voss isn't happy, Miller said, blocking the sidewalk. He heard you were selling his cattle. They were my cattle, May said, her voice steady. Miller ignored her. He looked at Eli. And you, the drifter who doesn't know when to drift. He opened his coat to reveal a heavy pistol. Give us the money, Miller said. And the papers. And maybe we let you ride out of here. Passers-by scrambled to get out of the way. The street cleared in seconds. Eli stood loose, his hands hanging at his sides. He looked at Miller. We are leaving, Eli said. But we are keeping the money. And the papers. Miller smiled. It was a wolf's smile. I don't think so. He reached for his gun. Eli didn't move. He waited. He looked at May. It was a question. He wouldn't start a war she couldn't finish. He was giving her the choice. Do we fight? May looked at Miller. She looked at the men who wanted to take everything she had, her land, her dignity, her life. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Eli moved. He didn't draw his gun. He stepped in, batting Miller's hand down as the pistol cleared leather. The gun went off, the shot going wild into the dirt. Eli drove his knee into Miller's stomach, doubling him over, then brought his elbow down on the back of the man's neck. Miller dropped like a sack of grain. The other 2 men lunged. Eli spun, drawing his Colt now. He didn't shoot to kill. He pistol-whipped the second man across the temple, sending him sprawling. The third man froze, finding the barrel of Eli's gun leveled at his chest. Get on your horse, Eli said to the man, his voice ice cold. And tell Voss the next time he sends men, he better send more. The man scrambled backward, dragging his fallen comrade. Miller groaned in the dirt. Get the horses, May, Eli said, keeping his gun trained on the alley. May ran to the livery. She came out leading the bay and the gray mare, moving fast. They mounted up in the street, the smell of gun smoke sharp in the air. Ride, Eli said. They spurred the horses, galloping out of Oakhaven as the sun dipped below the horizon. They rode hard, the wind tearing at their clothes. May leaned low over the mare's neck. The moon was rising, a sharp, white blade cutting through the darkness. She could hear the rhythm of the hooves, a drumbeat of defiance. She looked over at Eli, riding beside her, grim and steady. She realized then that she wasn't running away, for the first time in her life. She wasn't retreating into the shadows to hide. She was riding toward the fire. She was riding toward a courtroom where they would try to destroy her, and she didn't care. She was running toward a life where she got to be seen, scars and all. And she wasn't alone. The return to the homestead was not a homecoming. It was a preparation for war. The silence of the high plains, usually a comfort, now felt heavy with impending violence. The wind rattled the loose boards of the barn, sounding like footsteps that never arrived. May and Eli did not rest. They moved with the grim efficiency of soldiers digging a trench. They reinforced the heavy oak door of the cabin with a crossbeam hewn from a spare fence post. They boarded up the windows on the north side, leaving only narrow slits for rifles. They moved the meager supplies, The flour, the coffee, the ammunition, into the center of the main room, away from the walls where bullets might penetrate. The remaining cattle, the few strays they had not driven to Oakhaven, were moved into the deep draw behind the ridge. It was a natural shelter, hidden from the road, a place where a man would have to ride right on top of them to know they were there. Mr. Whitaker, the lawyer with the whiskey-stained coat and the sharp mind, had sent word ahead. The circuit judge, Honorable Thaddeus Moore, was due in the county seat within the week. He had granted a temporary hearing to review the injunction. It was a victory of paper, fragile and thin, but it was the only shield they had, in the evenings, by the light of a single lantern. May practiced what she would say. It was agony. To speak the truth of her life felt like peeling off her own skin. She stood by the fireplace, her hands gripping the mantel, while Eli sat at the table, writing down dates and boundary markers on a slate. I have lived here for 7 years, May began, her voice tight. My husband, Frank Kincaid, filed the claim in 1868. She stopped. She looked at the floor. You have to say it louder. May, Eli said gently. He didn't look up, giving her the space she needed. The back of the courtroom needs to hear you. They will stare, she whispered. When I stand up, they will not listen to the dates. They will just look at my hands. They will look at my size. They will wonder if the rumors are true. Let them stare. Eli said, You are not there to be a painting on the wall. You are there to be a witness. Tell them the truth. The truth has a weight to it that lies don't have. May took a breath. She squared her shoulders, mimicking the posture she used when she faced the unbroken horse. I have lived here for 7 years, she said again, louder this time. The deed is in my name. The water rights were signed by the surveyor. Eli nodded. Good. Again. He supported her not with soft words, which she would have rejected, but with work. He rode out during the day, despite his bruising ribs, to track down the few neighbors who hadn't been bought or cowed by Harlan Voss. He found a man named Tobias, a sheep farmer who lived 10 miles east. Tobias had seen Voss's men moving markers in the spring. He was terrified, but Eli sat on his porch for 3 hours, whittling a stick and talking about the weather, until Tobias finally agreed to sign a statement. But the town was not idle. The prejudice that had simmered in whispers began to boil over into action. On Tuesday morning, May went out to the mailbox at the end of the lane. She stopped 10 yards away. Someone had come in the night. They had used black tar to paint words on the whitewashed fence. Devil woman. Freak. Get out. The letters were crude, dripping down the wood like black blood. May stared at them. She felt a cold nausea in her stomach, the old shame rising up to choke her. She turned back to the house to get a bucket of whitewash. She would not let Eli see it. She would cover it before he woke. But the cruelty escalated 2 days later. They found the calf near the front gate. It was a young heifer, one of the few promising ones left. It had been shot through the neck. It wasn't just killed. It was displayed, propped up against the fence post, its tongue lolling out. A crude sign hung around its neck. Warning. May stood over the animal. Her hands hung at her sides. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. For a moment, she looked as if she might shatter, her face crumbling into a mask of pure despair. Then, the moment passed. Her expression hardened into granite. Get the shovel, she said to Eli. I will do it, Eli said, stepping forward. You go inside. No, May said. She turned to him, her eyes dry and furious. They want me to fall apart. They want me to run into town crying for the sheriff so they can laugh at the hysterical woman. I will not give them the satisfaction. She took the shovel herself. She dug the grave in the hard, frozen earth. It took her 2 hours. She sweated through her dress, her muscles burning, swinging the pickaxe with a violence that frightened the crows from the trees. When the hole was deep enough, she dragged the calf in and covered it. She packed the dirt down with her boots. She refused to make it a spectacle of grief. She made it an act of defiance. Hope arrived in a buggy the next afternoon, in the form of Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable was a widow herself. A woman of 60 with hands gnarled by arthritis and a reputation for knowing the medicinal properties of every weed on the plains. She had been the one to stitch May up years ago, on a night when Frank had been particularly heavy with the bottle and his fists. She climbed down from her buggy slowly. May met her on the porch. "I heard you were going to court." "Mrs.," Gable said, adjusting her bonnet. "I am," May said. "Whitaker came to see me." The old woman said, "He asked if I knew anything about the night you lost the baby." May went still. "That was a door she kept locked and barred. I told him I didn't know much." "Mrs.," Gable said, "but I told him I saw the bruises on your back that week, and I told him that Frank Kincaid was a man who liked to break things." She looked at May. "I am not a gossip. Maeve, I have kept your business private because a woman's pain belongs to her, but I won't stand by and watch them call you a liar. I will tell the judge what I saw. I won't tell them the private things. But I will tell them you lived in fear, and I will tell them the town knew it and did nothing." May felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Mrs." Gable nodded. "You are a hard woman to help. Maeve, but you don't deserve this." The confrontation came on Thursday. They saw the dust cloud first, a group of riders approaching the main gate. Eli checked his Colt and loosened it in the holster. May took the Winchester from the rack. It was Harlan Voss himself. He rode a massive black stallion, flanked by Sheriff Brady and 4 deputies. Voss was a man of silk vests and cold eyes, a man who believed the world was something to be bought or butchered. They stopped in the yard. Voss looked at the reinforced windows, a faint sneer on his lips. "Mrs. Kincaid," Voss called out. His voice was smooth, cultured, entirely out of place in the dirt. "Mr." "Voss," May said. She stood on the porch, the rifle held across her body. Eli stood a step behind her and to the right, his hand resting on his gun belt. "I am here to make you a final offer," Voss said. "I am a reasonable man. I don't like to see a woman in distress. State your business." May said, "Drop the injunction." Voss said, "Sign the deed over to me today. I will give you $500. That is enough to go to California. Start over where no one knows you, where you can be, whatever you are, in peace." He let the insult land. He smiled. "And if I refuse?" May asked. "Then the law takes its course." Voss said. The sheriff stepped his horse forward. "And there is a new development. Mrs. Kincaid, we have been looking into the circumstances of your husband's death. 3 years ago, you said it was a horse kick, but the coroner's report was inconclusive." May felt the blood drain from her face. "There is talk," the sheriff continued, "that maybe it wasn't a horse. Maybe it was a woman with the strength of a man. Maybe it was murder." He let the word hang there. "Murder. If you sign the land over," Voss said softly, "I imagine the sheriff might find that the investigation is unnecessary. Accidents happen, after all. It was blackmail, naked and ugly." May looked at Voss. She looked at the sheriff. She felt the trap closing around her. "No," she said. Voss's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? I said no." May said. Her voice shook, but she did not step back. "I did not murder my husband, and I will not sell my home to a thief. Get off my land." Voss looked at her with pure venom. Then he looked at Eli. "You are making a mistake, son," Voss said, standing with her. "You think she is a victim? She is a dangerous thing. She will drag you down with her." Eli stepped forward. He moved out of the shadow of the porch roof into the sunlight. "She is not alone," Eli said, "and she is not prey. You want the land, Voss? You will have to step over me to get it, and I promise you, I will make it a very high step." The quiet scandal of it rippled through the posse. The hired hand wasn't just working for wages. He was standing as her partner. He was claiming her side. Voss laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "Very well. We will see you in court, Mrs. Kincaid, if you live that long." He wheeled his horse around. As they rode away, the sheriff looked back, his eyes promising a reckoning. Inside the cabin, the adrenaline crashed. May slumped into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "They know," she whispered. They are going to use Frank against me. Eli bolted the door. He walked over to the table. Did you kill him, May? He asked it simply. There was no accusation in his tone, just a need for the ground truth. May looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed. He came home drunk, she said. He had lost money at cards. He was angry. He always came for me when he was angry. He cornered me in the barn. He had a pitchfork handle. He said he was going to beat the devil out of me. She looked at her hands, the large, capable hands that had built this ranch. I took it from him, she said. He was surprised. He didn't think I would fight back. We struggled. He fell. He hit his head on the anvil. She took a shuddering breath. I didn't strike the blow. Eli, but I didn't help him up. I watched him bleed. I watched him stop breathing. And I told the doctor the horse kicked him, because I knew if I told the truth, that I fought him, they would hang me. A woman doesn't kill her husband in this territory and live to tell about it. She looked at Eli, waiting for him to recoil, waiting for him to see the violence in her. Eli walked around the table. He pulled a chair close and sat knee to knee with her. That is not murder, May. That is survival. He tried to kill me. Eli, she whispered. For 3 years. I believe you, Eli said. And we are going to tell the judge that. No, May said. I can't. We have to. Eli insisted. If we hide it, they will twist it. If you tell it, if you tell the judge he attacked you, it is self-defense. Mrs. Gable will back you up. She saw the bruises. We fight this in the light. May, not in the dirt. The attack came at 2 in the morning. There was no warning this time, no conversation, just the sound of glass shattering as a torch was thrown against the side of the barn. Fire! Eli shouted, rolling off his pallet. May was already up, grabbing her rifle. They rushed to the window slits. Outside, shadows were moving in the yard, riders carrying torches. They were trying to burn the barn again, trying to finish what they started. Shoot to miss, May yelled. Just scare them off. She didn't want to kill. She didn't want to give the sheriff a body to pin on her. Eli leveled his Colt through the slit and fired. The shot cracked loudly in the small room. A horse screamed outside. Return fire erupted. Bullets slammed into the heavy oak logs of the cabin. Splinters flew like shrapnel. A window pane shattered, spraying glass across the floor. They are circling, Eli yelled. Watch the back door. May ran to the back. She saw a man trying to kick in the pantry door. She fired around through the wood, high, near the top of the frame. The kicking stopped, and she heard footsteps running away. It was chaotic, messy, terrifying. It wasn't a heroic stand. It was a desperate scramble in the dark, ears ringing from the concussions, throat burning from the gun smoke that filled the cabin. Eli moved to the front window. He leaned out to get a better angle on a man trying to throw a torch onto the porch roof. Eli, get back! May screamed. A shot rang out from the darkness. Eli jerked back as if he had been punched. He spun around and hit the floor hard. Eli! May dropped her rifle. She scrambled across the floor on her hands and knees, heedless of the glass. Eli was clutching his upper thigh. Blood was pumping dark and fast between his fingers. I am hit, he gritted out, his face white. Leg! May grabbed him by the collar of his coat. She dragged him away from the window, behind the heavy table. She was strong. Thank God she was strong. She hauled him as if he were a child, leaving a smear of red on the floorboards. She tore her skirt. She ripped a strip of heavy wool and tied it around his leg, high up, cinching it tight. Her hands were slick with his blood. She forced herself to breathe. She forced the panic down into a small, tight box. The shooting outside stopped. The riders, having met resistance and knowing the element of surprise was gone, were retreating. They galloped off into the night, leaving silence and the smell of burning pitch. May sat back on her heels. She looked at Eli. He was conscious, but his eyes were glassy with shock. Did we get them? He asked weakly. They are gone, May said. She checked the tourniquet. The bleeding had slowed. It had missed the big artery, but it was deep. She looked at his face. He looked pale. So pale. You idiot, she whispered, her voice trembling. You stood in the window. I had to stop the torch. he said. May leaned over him. She brushed the hair back from his damp forehead. "I can't lose you," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical reality. "I don't know how to be alone anymore. Eli, I can't do this without you." Eli reached up. His bloody hand touched her cheek. "You won't lose me," he whispered. "You are the reason I am still here. May, before I found this place, I was just looking for a place to die. You gave me a reason to live." May closed her eyes. Tears leaked out, hot and fast. "I am so scared," she confessed. "Not of us, of you seeing me, really seeing me. Show me," Eli said. It was a request, not a demand. May looked at him, the man who had bled for her, the man who had stood between her and the world. Slowly, in the dim light of the lantern on the floor, she unbuttoned the top of her dress. She pulled it down further than she had before. She showed him the deep, ugly scar on her breastbone where Frank had cut her. She showed him the burn marks on her shoulder. She showed him the twisted ridge of her rib. She sat there, half naked, covered in blood and soot, trembling. Eli looked. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He looked at the scars with a profound, quiet reverence. He traced the line of the knife wound with his thumb, not hurting, just acknowledging. "You are a survivor," he whispered. "Every one of these is a victory, May. It means he didn't win." He pulled her down to him. He kissed the scar on her shoulder. "Beautiful," he said. May wept. She wept for the years of hiding, for the shame, for the relief of finally being known and still being loved. The morning of the hearing was cold and bright. They rode to the county seat in the wagon. Eli lay in the back on a pile of straw, his leg bandaged and splinted. He refused to stay behind. He held his coat on his chest. May drove. She wore her best black dress. She had scrubbed the blood from her skin, but she couldn't scrub the memory of the night from her eyes. She looked fierce, tired, and unyielding. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken. People were standing along the walls. They had come for the show. They had come to see the giant widow. Judge Thaddeus Moore sat behind the high bench. He was a stern man with bushy eyebrows and little patience. Harlan Voss sat at the plaintiff's table, looking bored. His lawyer, a man named Darrow with a slick oil can smile, sat beside him. Mr. Whitaker sat at the defense table. He looked rumpled, but his eyes were sharp. May sat beside him. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her back like a physical weight. The proceedings began. Darrow stood up. He didn't waste time on land surveys. "Your Honor," he began, pacing in front of the jury. "We are here to discuss a property dispute, but at the heart of this dispute is a question of character, a question of nature." He turned to point a finger at May. "Mrs. Kincaid claims this land is hers, but the town knows differently. The town knows that Mrs. Kincaid is a woman of violence, a woman of unnatural appetites, a woman who, perhaps, is not a woman at all in the eyes of God." "Objection!" Whitaker shouted. "Standing up. This is irrelevant. It goes to credibility," Darrow shouted back. "If she lies about what she is, she will lie about a deed." The crowd murmured. Someone laughed. Darrow continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "And let us not forget the mysterious death of Frank Kincaid, a man in his prime, struck down. And his widow, she didn't mourn. She prospered. She took his land. She took a drifter into her bed. May griped the edge of the table. The wood dug into her palms. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She looked back at the gallery. Eli was there, sitting on a bench near the door, his leg propped up. He was pale, but his eyes were locked on hers. He gave a small nod. "Stand tall." May stood up. "I wish to speak," she said. Her voice cut through the murmuring. The judge looked at her. "You may take the stand, Mrs. Kincaid." May walked to the witness chair. The wood creaked under her weight. She sat down. Darrow approached her. "Mrs. Kincaid," he said. "Or should I call you something else? Is it true you have the strength of a man? Is it true you have marks on your body that you hide?" May looked at him. "It is true I am strong," she said. "I had to be, to survive this land, and to survive my husband." Darrow smiled. "Ah, so you admit you fought your husband?" "I admit I survived him," May said. She looked at the judge. "My husband beat me." "Your Honor, he burned me. He cut me. For 3 years. The courtroom went quiet. I have scars." "Yes," May continued, her voice gaining strength. "Darrow wants you to think they are marks of the devil, but they are just marks of a man who liked to hurt things. I hid them because I was ashamed. I hid myself because the world is cruel to women who don't fit in." She looked at Voss. "But I am not hiding anymore. My deed is legal. My water rights are mine. And I am a woman who has worked every inch of that ground with my own hands." Darrow tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, this is—" "Sit down. Mr. Darrow," the judge snapped. "Mr. Whitaker stood up. He walked to the bench. "Your Honor, if I may, I have a document here. It is the original filing for the Voss claim on the creek." He handed the paper to the judge. "And I have an affidavit from the county clerk's office in the capital. It confirms that the witness, a Mr. J. Miller, was not in the territory on the date this claim was signed. He was in jail in Texas." The crowd gasped. Whitaker turned to the gallery. "And I have a witness, Mrs. Alma Gable, who is prepared to testify to the injuries she treated on Mrs. Kincaid during her marriage. Injuries consistent with abuse, not accidents." The judge looked at the paper. He looked at Voss. Voss's bored expression had vanished, replaced by a dark flush of rage. "This document is a forgery," the judge said, his voice ringing out. He looked at Sheriff Brady. "And Sheriff, if you were involved in enforcing a claim based on a forged document, I will have your badge." The gavel banged down. It sounded like a gunshot. "I am ordering an immediate investigation into the Voss land filings," the judge announced. "And I am granting a temporary order of protection for Mrs. Kincaid. Any man found trespassing on her land will be held in contempt of this court and jailed." The courtroom erupted. May sat in the chair. She felt lightheaded. She looked at Eli. He was smiling. It was over. The lie was broken. But as the bailiff moved to clear the court, May saw Harlan Voss stand up. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at May. He didn't speak. He simply adjusted his silk vest, put on his hat, and walked out. The look in his eyes wasn't defeat. It was the cold, flat look of a predator who has decided that if he cannot use the law, he will use something else. May shivered. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the piece of paper the judge had just signed wouldn't stop a bullet. Voss was cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. The ride back from the county seat was quiet, but it was not peaceful. The paper signed by Judge Moore lay folded in May's breast pocket, resting against her heart like a shield made of tissue. It was a court order. It was the law. But out here, where the wind screamed across 50 miles of empty grass before it hit a fence post, the law was a ghost that only appeared when it had a gun to back it up. They crested the final rise that overlooked the Kincaid homestead just as the sun began to bleed into the western horizon. Eli pulled the team to a halt. The wagon creaked. "Damn them," Eli whispered. The destruction was not total, but it was surgical. The fences they had repaired with such agonizing labor had been cut. The wire coiled and tossed into the mud like tangled snakes. The gate was smashed off its hinges. The yard was empty. The few remaining cattle they had hidden in the draw were gone. The tracks were churned deep into the half-frozen mud, leading south toward the broken country. May stared at the house, her sanctuary. The door stood open, swinging slightly in the draft. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff. She walked to the porch, her boots crunching on broken glass. Nailed to the doorframe was a piece of paper. It wasn't legal stationery. It was a page torn from a ledger. The message was scrawled in charcoal. "The law stops at the river. Come get them if you want them. Or leave and live." May pulled the note down. Her hand trembled, crumpling the paper into a tight ball. The old instinct, the one that had kept her alive for 3 years under Frank's roof, roared to life in her chest. "Run! Pack the wagon," she said, her voice hollow. Eli had climbed down, favoring his bandaged leg. He limped up the steps, Pack for what? To leave, May said. She didn't look at him. She looked at the horizon. Terrified. Voss has taken the herd. He has wrecked the fences. He is waiting for us out there. If we go after him, he will kill us and say we were rustlers. She turned to Eli, her eyes pleading. We have the money from the sale in Oakhaven. We can go north, Montana. We can start over. Eli took the crumpled note from her hand. He smoothed it out against the doorframe. If we run, May, we don't start over, he said quietly. We just die slower. He looked at the tracks leading south. Voss isn't just stealing cattle, Eli said. He is stealing your name. If you leave now, the story they tell in Bitter Creek forever will be that you were guilty, that you ran because you had something to hide, that the monster finally went back to the dark. I don't care about the story, May cried. I care about being alive. Eli stepped closer. He took her shoulders in his hands. The grip was firm, grounding. You care, he said. You stood up in that courtroom and told the truth. You let them see you. If you run now, you make that truth a lie. He looked at her with a fierce, uncompromising belief. We go get the herd. May, we finish it. May looked at him. She saw the bruising on his face, the limp in his step, the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. He was ready to bleed for a patch of dirt that wasn't even his, just because it belonged to her. She took a breath. The cold air filled her lungs, sharp and clarifying. She pushed the panic down, burying it deep under the bedrock of her will. Get the rifles, she said. They tracked the herd into the Badlands. It was a stretch of country that looked like the earth had broken open and never healed. Sharp ridges of volcanic rock rose up like jagged teeth. The gullies were deep and shadowed, dry veins in a dead body. It took them a day and a half. The terrain was brutal on the horses and worse on Eli's leg. He rode grimly, his face gray with pain, but he never complained. May rode point, reading the sign. Voss hadn't tried to hide his trail. He wanted them to follow. It was a trap, baited with the last of her livelihood. On the second evening, the wind died down, leaving a silence that felt heavy and expectant. They smelled the smoke before they saw the fire. They tied the horses a mile back in a box canyon and proceeded on foot. They climbed a ridge of slate, their movements slow and careful. Below them, in a natural amphitheater of rock, lay Voss's camp. It was more than a trail camp. It was a holding pen for a massive operation. There were makeshift corrals filled with cattle, not just May's small herd, but steers with brands from 3 different counties. Voss had been skimming from his neighbors for years, hiding the stolen stock in this labyrinth until he could drive them to a different market. In the center of the camp sat a large canvas tent. A fire burned brightly. Men sat around it, laughing, passing a bottle. May counted 6 of them, and there, sitting on a crate, smoking a cigar, was Harlan Voss. Standing next to him, looking nervous, was Sheriff Brady. See the man in the green coat? Eli whispered, lying flat beside her on the ridge. May squinted. The man was counting stacks of currency on a folding table. That is Miller, Eli said. The witness who was supposed to be in Texas. Voss bought him out of jail to sign that fake claim. And the book, May whispered. On the table next to the money was a thick leather ledger. Voss was making notes in it. He is writing down the brands. Eli realized. He is arrogant. He thinks he owns the law, so he keeps records of his crimes. If we get that book, May said, the tightness in her chest turning into a cold resolve. We have him? We can't just walk down there. Eli said, there are 6 of them. We don't walk, May said. We flush them. She pointed to the far side of the corral. The brush there is dry as tinder. If the wind shifts, no fire, Eli said. We need the evidence intact. We have to draw them out. He looked at his gun. I will circle to the east. I will fire a few shots. Make them think they are being flanked by a posse. When they move toward me, you go for the tent. Get the book. You can't outrun them on that leg, May hissed. I don't have to outrun them, Eli said. I just have to keep them busy. He started to crawl back down the ridge. May grabbed his wrist. "Don't you dare die on me. Eli Turner." Eli looked back. He smiled, a flash of white in the growing dark. "Not today." May. The first shot cracked through the canyon like a whip. It hit the coffee pot on the fire, sending a spray of boiling grounds and water into the air. The men at the camp scrambled. "Douse the light!" Voss screamed. Another shot rang out from the east ridge, kicking up dirt near the sheriff's boots. "It is a posse!" Miller shouted. "They are on the ridge! Get the horses!" Voss yelled. "Spread out! Flank them!" 3 of the men grabbed their rifles and ran toward the horses. Sheriff Brady and Voss stayed near the tent, crouching behind the crates. May moved. She slid down the shale slope on the west side, the noise covered by the shouting and the panicked cattle. She hit the bottom of the draw and ran. She moved with a speed that defied her size, a juggernaut of adrenaline. She reached the back of the tent just as Eli fired again from the east. May slashed the canvas with her hunting knife and stepped through the tear. Voss and the sheriff were facing the other way, staring into the dark. The ledger lay on the table. May grabbed the book. At the sound of the paper shifting, Voss spun around. "You!" he snarled. He raised his pistol. May didn't freeze. She threw the heavy ledger at him with all her strength. It struck him in the chest, knocking his aim wide. His gun went off, the bullet tearing through the tent roof. May lunged. She didn't have a weapon in her hand. She became the weapon. She slammed into Voss, driving him back over the folding table. The wood splintered under their combined weight. Sheriff Brady shouted, fumbling for his holster. "Drop it!" "Sheriff!" Eli's voice came from the front of the tent. He stood in the opening, his Colt leveled at Brady's heart. He was breathing hard, sweating, his leg trembling, but his aim was rock steady. "You are under arrest," Eli said, "for corruption, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder." Brady froze. He looked at Eli. He looked at May, who had Voss pinned in the wreckage of the table, her forearm pressed against his throat. "You have got no authority." "Drifter!" Brady spat. "I have got the judge's order," Eli said, "and we have got the book." Suddenly, Voss bucked. He drove a knee into May's stomach. It was a vicious blow. May gasped and rolled, losing her grip. Voss scrambled up. He grabbed a piece of the broken table leg, a jagged shard of hardwood. He didn't go for Eli. He went for May. He raised the wood like a club, his face twisted into a mask of pure, hateful rage. "I will kill you, you freak!" he screamed. Eli couldn't shoot. May was in the line of fire. "May!" Eli shouted. May looked up. She saw the wood coming down. She saw the hate in Voss's eyes. She didn't cower. She didn't cover her head. She caught his wrist. It was a sound of meat hitting meat. May's hand, large and calloused from years of swinging axes and breaking horses, clamped around Voss's wrist in midair. She stopped the blow cold. Voss's eyes went wide. He strained, putting all his weight behind the club. May pushed back. She rose to her feet, forcing Voss upward. She looked him in the eye. "I am not a freak," she snarled. "I am the landowner." She twisted his arm. There was a sickening pop as the shoulder joint gave way. Voss screamed and dropped the club. May didn't stop. She spun him around and shoved him toward the sheriff. Voss stumbled, clutching his arm, and fell at Brady's feet. Eli stepped forward, kicking Voss's pistol away. "It is over," Eli said. "Outside." The other men were returning, guns drawn. They stopped at the sight of their boss on the ground, and the sheriff held at gunpoint. "Drop them," Eli yelled, "or the sheriff dies first." Brady looked at his deputies. He looked at the ledger lying in the dirt. He looked at the unbreakable resolve in May Kincaid's face. "Put them down, boys," Brady croaked. "The game is up." The aftermath was a long, cold silence. They tied Voss and his men to the corral posts. They secured the ledger. They waited for dawn. When the sun rose, painting the Badlands in brilliant stripes of orange and purple, the cost of the victory became clear. Eli had torn his stitches. His trouser leg was soaked in blood. May had a bruise blooming on her jaw where the table had hit her, and her hands were swollen. They didn't speak of triumph. Justice in the West was not a parade. It was a chore. It meant hauling men back to town. It meant filing papers. It meant burying the 2 steers that had been killed in the crossfire. They rode back to Bitter Creek 2 days later. It was a slow procession. May drove the wagon with the prisoners. Eli rode behind, driving the recovered herd. When they entered the town, the street went quiet. People came out of the shops. They watched. They saw Harlan Voss, the cattle baron, bound and beaten, sitting in the back of a dirt-stained wagon. They saw the sheriff, head bowed, his badge removed. And they saw May. She sat on the buckboard seat, her back straight, looking neither left nor right. She looked tired. She looked battered, but she looked undeniable. She pulled the team to a halt in front of the courthouse. She climbed down and walked up the steps. She didn't wait for permission. She walked into the office of the circuit judge and slammed the ledger onto his desk. "Here's your proof," she said. The winter that followed was hard, but it was a clean kind of hard. With Voss in jail awaiting trial and the sheriff deposed, the pressure on the Kincaid homestead vanished. The town of Bitter Creek didn't suddenly embrace May with open arms. Prejudice runs deep and dies slow. But the dynamic had shifted. When May walked into the mercantile, the men stopped talking, but they tipped their hats. It wasn't friendship. It was respect. They knew what she had done. They knew she had taken down the biggest wolf in the valley. Some of the shame lingered. Mrs. Higgins, the preacher's wife, crossed the street one day to avoid May, but stopped halfway. She looked at May, flushed pink, and gave a stiff, awkward nod before hurrying on. It was enough. May and Eli rebuilt. They didn't just patch the holes, they made the place stronger. They replaced the fence line with new cedar posts. They rebuilt the barn roof. In late January, during a thaw, a wagon arrived at the ranch. It was Mrs. Gable, and with her was a young girl, perhaps 14, with thin wrists and eyes that looked too big for her face. "This is Alice, Mrs." Gable said. Her folks were sharecroppers on the Voss land. When the company seized their shack last year, her father took to drink and froze to death. Her mother passed last week. May looked at the girl. She saw the terror in her eyes. She saw the way the girl tried to shrink inside her thin coat, trying to be invisible. "She reminds me of someone," Eli said softly, standing beside May. May walked down the steps. She stood in front of the girl. Alice looked up, eyes widening at May's size. "You are big," Alice whispered. "I am," May said. "It helps with the work." She extended a hand. "We have got a spare room," May said, "and we have got chickens that need tending. It is hard work, and the wind never stops blowing, but nobody will ever hurt you here." Alice hesitated. Then, slowly, she put her small hand in May's large one. "I can work," the girl said. "Then you are home," May said. The snow melted in March, revealing the brown earth, promising green. May stood before the mirror in the bedroom. The door was open. Eli was in the kitchen, fixing the coffee grinder. She looked at herself. She wore a simple cotton shift. She looked at the scars on her shoulder, the thick muscle of her arms. For years, she had looked in the mirror and apologized to the empty room for taking up so much space. She had hated the vessel she was carried in. She touched the scar on her chest. It was still there. It would always be there. But it wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was just history, like a scratch on a rock or a lightning scar on a tree. She put on her dress. She didn't button it all the way to the chin. She left the top button open, letting the air touch her skin. She walked out into the kitchen. Eli looked up. His hair was graying at the temples now, and he walked with a permanent hitch in his stride from the leg wound. But his eyes were clear. The shadows that had chased him from Kansas were gone, replaced by the steady light of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" May said. They walked out to the porch. The sun was just coming up, cresting the horizon and setting the prairie on fire with gold light. They walked to the fence line, the new, strong fence that marked the edge of their world. Alice was already out by the coop, feeding the chickens, her laughter drifting on the breeze. Eli put his arm around May's waist. He didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, his side pressing against her side. May leaned into him. She felt the solidness of him, the warmth. "I used to think I was cursed," May said, watching the sun hit the distant mountains. "To be this way, to be alone." Eli turned to her. He took her hand, his rough fingers interlacing with hers. "You were never cursed, May," he said. "You were just built for a heavy load, and now you don't have to carry it alone." They stood there as the sun rose fully, bathing the ranch in light. Two silhouettes against the vast, open sky. Broken things that had mended each other. They didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The wind blew, the grass bowed, and the fence held. They chose each other again, in the quiet morning, in a world that had tried to break them and failed. Thank you for journeying with me through the high plains and into the lives of May and Eli. It has been a privilege to tell this story of grit, survival, and the kind of love that is earned rather than given. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment telling me where in the world you are listening or reading from, and share your thoughts on the story in English. Did May and Eli's fight for justice resonate with you? If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of the American frontier, where the land is hard but the hearts are true. Until next time, keep your fences strong.